We have no obligation to make art. We have no obligation to make history. We have no obligation to make a statement. But sometimes, if we're lucky, we may just do all three. To make money is our only objective. These are the words of Michael Eisner, former CEO and chairman of the Walt Disney Company. Those words were written in a now infamous film manifesto written by Eisner while he was president of Paramount Pictures, mere months before he became chief executive officer of Disney. Some of you may know who Michael Eisner is, some of you may not. However, one thing is undeniable, and that is that Michael Eisner is incredibly important when it comes to Disney history. To say that Michael Eisner is a polarizing figure in the Disney community would be an understatement. But regardless of your opinion on him, Michael Eisner's impact on the company is undeniable. Michael Eisner was CEO and chairman of the Walt Disney Company for over 20 years. He was the longest tenured CEO in the company's history. And he was the first outsider brought in as CEO, which was a huge deal because Disney was and is known for hiring and promoting from within. When Michael Eisner came to the company, it was not in good shape. Michael Eisner brought the company back to life. He played a very pivotal role in saving Disney. And part of Michael Eisner's tenure included the Disney Renaissance. Most, if not all of you, have probably heard the term Disney Renaissance. What is the Disney Renaissance? Some of you may know it as a collection of films from the years 1989 to 1999. But the Disney Renaissance is so much more than that, and it was absolutely imperative to the company. The Walt Disney Company would not be what it is now if it were not for the Disney Renaissance. Michael Eisner, along with Frank Wells, the former chief of Warner Brothers Pictures, and Jeffrey Katzenberg, a colleague of Michael Eisner's and vice president of production while they were at Paramount Pictures, these three men came together and became Disney's Renaissance men. Renaissance means rebirth, but to say that it was a rebirth for Disney would be completely undermining the massive achievements of what Michael Eisner's regime was actually able to accomplish during his first 10 years as CEO of the Walt Disney Company. Michael Eisner was brought in as CEO and chairman of the Walt Disney Company in 1984 by Roy E. Disney, the son of Roy O. Disney and Walt's nephew, and a powerful board member named Stanley Gold. Along with the Eisner hiring came Frank Wells, who was hired as chief operating officer and president of the company. Eisner brought along Jeffrey Katzenberg. Eisner and Katzenberg worked together at Paramount Pictures, where Katzenberg was defined by his relentless ambition and his incredible work ethic. He was known as the Golden Retriever by Paramount chief Barry Diller. Eisner brought Katzenberg over to Disney and made him chairman of the studio. At the time, Disney was not the multi-billion-dollar media empire that we know them to be today. In fact, if it were not for Eisner, Wells, and Katzenberg, Disney would not exist as we know it. Michael Eisner came to Disney, and his focus was to revive the live-action studio, because at this point, Disney was not a major studio. As hard as that is to believe, Walt Disney Studios was not successful. They had not had a hit in a long time. And Michael Eisner, bringing his very, very famous ideology of a singles and doubles strategy to the live-action studios of the Walt Disney Studios, and subsidiaries such as Touchstone allowed the company to revive a very fledgling live-action film business. Now, when Michael Eisner arrived as chief executive officer, when he arrived at the Disney team building, he infamously pointed to the ink and paint building and told Jeffrey Katzenberg, "That's where they make the animated films. That's your problem." Jeffrey Katzenberg took this problem and he ran with it. Katzenberg was determined to revive animation. After the death of Walt Disney, animation was not what it once was. Walt Disney created so many classic animated features, and after his death, the animation studio failed to capitalize on the legacy that Walt built. They were not producing films that were up to the par that audiences were used to from a Disney animated movie. In fact, some of them were just flat out bad. So what happened is much of what was known as the old guard, which were animators that worked at the studio when Walt was still alive, and a lot of new animators from schools like Caltech came into the studio, and you know they're young and vivacious and they're ready to go and they're excited to get to work. They're very creative, and the old guard is pretty adamant about sticking to the old ways. They want to do things the way Walt would have done them, in a very sort of classicist kind of staying true to the brand. But that wasn't working for them, because in order to fully understand how special the Disney Renaissance was, we need to understand the failure of the Disney Dark Age. And to say that there were a lot of critical and financial disappointments, well, again, that's an understatement. Walt Disney Animation was just not the same. So when Jeffrey Katzenberg became chairman of the studio, he was determined to revive animation and restore it to its former glory. The first film Katzenberg had any involvement with was the only animated feature in production, which was the Black Cauldron, which is notoriously one of Disney's biggest flops. Jeffrey Katzenberg watched what they had for the Black Cauldron, and he said, rather flatly, "This isn't good. This doesn't work." He said it's too dark, it's too scary, and some of the movie just needed to be cut because it was too long. To which the animators informed Jeffrey Katzenberg that you cannot edit an animated film. Katzenberg thought this was ridiculous. He said anything can be edited. I'll show you how to edit it. So Katzenberg insisted that they take the film to an editing bay and he will show them how to edit an animated feature. Despite his best efforts, the Black Cauldron could not be saved and it was a notorious flop. The next film, The Great Mouse Detective, it was successful enough to justify the animation studio's continued existence. Because prior to the arrival of Eisner, Katzenberg, and Wells, animation was very much in jeopardy of being shut down, and that is really hard to fathom, because animation is the heart of Disney. Disney lives and breathes off of its animated features, and there was a time when it was so bad, even when Eisner initially arrived, he was considering shutting down the animation studio permanently because they were underperforming, and his attention just wasn't directed towards animation when he initially arrived at Disney. But Katzenberg saw something. He believed in the new young talent. He believed in restoring the legacy. So when The Great Mouse Detective came out and competed with An American Tail, which was made by Don Bluth, a former Disney animator who not only left the company to start his own production company, but he also took several Disney animators with him. Katzenberg was determined to get the best out of these new animators. And The Great Mouse Detective, it received a pretty good critical response, and it made enough money to justify the animated studio moving forward. The next film after The Great Mouse Detective was Oliver and Company, and this was the first film that really had Jeffrey Katzenberg's fingerprints on it. Jeffrey Katzenberg had the idea of making a Broadway musical into an animated film, and that was Oliver Twist. Oliver and Company was successful enough that it proved animation still had something left. And it also proved that Katzenberg's idea of bringing a Broadway musical to the big screen using animation rather than live action is a formula that could be very successful. Oliver and Company started the trend of Disney musicals playing out like a Broadway play, and it also started the trend of bringing in big name talent to voice some of the characters and sing the songs. Now, the Disney Renaissance, as we know it, did not begin in earnest until 1989, with a little scrappy underdog called The Little Mermaid. Maybe you might have heard of it. I don't know. The point is, when Eisner arrived and Katzenberg became chairman of the studio, they used to have what were called Gong Shows. And at these Gong Shows, filmmakers of all types, producers, animators, directors, would come to these meetings with 3 ideas for movies. They didn't have to be fully developed ideas. They could be something as simple as a sketch, an actual treatment, storyboards, whatever. As long as you had 3 ideas for a movie, that was all that mattered. And 2 animators, who happened to serve as 2 of 4 directors on The Great Mouse Detective, John Musker and Ron Clements, came to this meeting with an idea of adapting Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid. The pitch was gonged. It was thrown out because it was too similar to Splash, which was Touchstone Studios' first live-action hit, and it was the only hit under Ron Miller, the CEO before Eisner. And this hit came right before Eisner was hired as CEO. But Jeffrey Katzenberg liked the idea enough to say, you know what, that sounds promising, let's develop that a little bit further. So, Musker and Clements, they developed The Little Mermaid a little bit more, and they came back with a more developed idea for the story. They had written out a full treatment for the movie. And this is when Katzenberg jumped on board, because he saw the potential. After spending hours in the Disney archives, Katzenberg believed that he had an understanding of what made Walt Disney Animation special. Good versus evil, universal themes, fairy tales. He saw The Little Mermaid as a huge jumping off point to really revive the animation studio. And he was right. The Little Mermaid was a success. It received rave reviews from critics. It made a ton of money at the box office for its time. And several critics deemed it the next Disney classic. The first Disney classic in almost 30 years. This was huge. The next film in the Disney Renaissance we typically don't associate with the Renaissance. The Rescuers Down Under. While the movie wasn't a huge hit, it did provide some big technical innovations and allowed for the cap system to be used in future Disney Renaissance films. And because The Rescuers Down Under did not deliver a particularly promising opening weekend, Jeffrey Katzenberg pulled all of the advertising for the movie immediately after the first weekend. Needless to say, the people who worked on that film were a little bit incensed. But The Rescuers Down Under is not considered one of the better Renaissance films. And I wouldn't even say that it's a bad movie, it's just that it's forgotten in this sea of other classics that this era produced. The next film is the one that changed everything, because Katzenberg and Eisner brought a different culture to Disney when they first arrived. They wanted to change the mindset. And Katzenberg infamously said, "I'm not interested in the Academy Awards. I'm interested in the Bank of America Awards." And a lot of the animators took offense to this. The next film in the Disney Renaissance was Beauty and the Beast, and it changed everything. Not only did it gross a huge amount of money, but it garnered illustrious reviews. And it was the first ever animated feature nominated for Best Picture at the Academy Awards. And once this happened, it virtually changed everything. Katzenberg set his sights on Oscar Gold because he knew that he had done it. He had successfully brought back animation from the brink. Beauty and the Beast is widely regarded as one of, if not the best Disney film of all time, and with good reason. This movie was special. Not only was it an incredible storytelling and animation achievement, but the music was unforgettable, and the themes, the love story, were so profound and resonant that it completely changed the landscape of everything for Disney. And what followed, as we know, Aladdin, it made even more money and caused the trend of big-name A-list celebrities voicing characters in animated Disney movies. Robin Williams as the genie, widely recognized as a highlight. Musker and Clements directed Aladdin only a few years after making The Little Mermaid. Disney animation was on absolute fire. And after Aladdin, there was a bit of a break, because after the bounce back of The Great Mouse Detective and Oliver and Company, Jeffrey Katzenberg made a bold statement that the animation studio would be producing a film every year. This wasn't the case in 1993, as there was no animated Disney film, but they came back in 1994 with The Lion King. And The Lion King was a movie that at the time not a lot of people believed in, because The Lion King and Pocahontas were being developed concurrently. And all of the big name animators jumped to Pocahontas because Katzenberg believed it was a sure thing. That was the real movie. That was the artistic movie. That was the movie that was going to win them the Oscar. And so The Lion King had a staff of people that were passionate about the project because they wanted to work on it. And we all know the story there. The Lion King became the highest grossing animated film of all time. It received great reviews, and it eventually got its own Broadway production and became one of the longest running Broadway shows in history. But things also changed in 1994. Jeffrey Katzenberg was fired. Now, the press release technically said that he resigned, but make no mistake, Katzenberg was forced out, because after the death of Frank Wells, the wheels just started to come off. Eisner was in constant conflict with Jeffrey Katzenberg because he did not want to feel like he was in competition for his #1 spot. And as tragic as this sounds, almost as soon as Frank Wells passed, Jeffrey Katzenberg made a serious run at President and Chief Operating Officer of Disney. He believed he earned that position. He earned the right to be #2 in the company. And in many ways, he did. His achievements speak for themselves, but at the same time, Katzenberg showed a little bit of disrespect, to say the least, for Frank Wells. And Frank Wells was largely regarded as the mediator. He was the calm, collected businessman that would work things out whenever there were disagreements in the company. And the friction between Eisner and Katzenberg had been brewing for quite some time up until this point. Eisner did not like that Katzenberg promoted himself around these very successful, very critically acclaimed animated films. But Katzenberg, being ambitious and wanting to climb the corporate ladder and just advance his career, didn't really care what Eisner thought. So he continually did it because Katzenberg believed that the Disney Renaissance was a product of him being the chairman of Walt Disney Animation Studios. When Frank Wells died, Katzenberg wanted to be president of the company, and Michael Eisner said he would do it, but he had to wait. If Katzenberg just gave Eisner a little bit of time, he would be president of the company in short order. But there was one problem, and that was Roy E. Disney. He did not get along with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and he promised Michael Eisner that if Katzenberg was made president of the Walt Disney Company, he would lead a board revolt. And Eisner, wanting to hold on to his power, wanting to hold on to his position as CEO, was not going to let that happen. So Eisner forced Katzenberg to resign. And with Katzenberg out, Joe Roth, a veteran Hollywood producer, was made chairman of the studio. And Pocahontas was released to lukewarm reviews. It was not The Lion King. It was not Aladdin. It definitely wasn't Beauty and the Beast. And it was a box office disappointment. That's not to say that it didn't make money, but it was a disappointment in comparison to what came before it. After Pocahontas came The Hunchback of Notre Dame. Another disappointment. It didn't make what they expected, it didn't win any awards, and it did not receive the best reviews. Although I think that if The Hunchback of Notre Dame was released today, it would probably be received in a much more positive light due to its themes and the changing of the source material that was made. But I digress. Around this time, people were kind of getting tired of Disney animated films. Renaissance fatigue was setting in. The animation studio was not what it once was under Katzenberg. There was no clear leadership at the top of the company apart from Michael Eisner. There was no number two. Because while all this was going on, Michael Eisner hired Michael Ovitz to become president and chief operating officer of Disney. The only problem was Ovitz had no real authority. Ovitz was constantly undermined, and he had virtually no power at the company. Everything that Ovitz tried to do, Eisner either undid or just flat out prevented him from doing it. And Ovitz was understandably not happy because he was trying to prove that he could be a good Hollywood executive. Ovitz was known as the most powerful man in Hollywood up until this point. He was the founder of CAA, Creative Artists Agency, and when he became president of Disney, he wanted to prove himself. And of course he had shortcomings, never being an executive before. But to blame everything solely on Michael Ovitz is a little bit unfair. And eventually, Ovitz was forced out only 11 months after being hired as president of the Walt Disney Company. After the release of Hunchback of Notre Dame came Hercules, Mulan, and Tarzan. And these movies were all more well received than Pocahontas and Hunchback, but they did not meet either the critical reception or the financial success of those initial string of films, The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and Lion King. Now, the Disney Renaissance virtually saved the company because animation is the heart of Disney. And it goes without saying that the Disney Renaissance single-handedly saved the animation department. They were on the verge of being shut down, and even when they were kept on, they were moved to a very industrial, small office in Glendale rather than being a part of the main Disney lot in Burbank. The Disney Renaissance saved Disney animation. A lot of people get hung up on who is responsible for the Disney Renaissance. Was it Michael Eisner? Was it Frank Wells? Was it Jeffrey Katzenberg? And where did it all go wrong? I don't think there's a definitive answer to that, because I think everybody made some serious contributions. Had Michael Eisner not come to the company and been so adamant about changing the culture and instilling a mindset within the company that prioritized creativity, I don't know that the Disney Renaissance would have happened. Had Frank Wells not been a part of the team and made the smart business decisions that he did, I don't know that the Disney Renaissance would have happened. Had Jeffrey Katzenberg not been made head of the studio, I don't know that the Disney Renaissance would have happened. There were a lot of people that contributed to the Disney Renaissance being as successful as it was. I don't think we can credit any one person for it. But I do know that there were several things that went on behind the scenes. The tension between Eisner and Katzenberg, the feuding between Roy E. Disney and Katzenberg, the mistrust among several executives within the studio, Roth, Katzenberg, Peter Schneider. It was all going to happen eventually. The fact that it happened in the middle of the Disney Renaissance was unfortunate. But the fact is, those movies are looked on very fondly to this day. When you ask somebody born in the 90s, somebody my age, what Disney movies they think of, they are likely going to list a Renaissance movie 9 times out of 10. The Disney Renaissance will go down in history. It saved the company, it saved animation, and it was meaningful because not only did it cultivate a culture of creativity and ambition, but the Disney Renaissance proved that you should never give up on your identity, because that was Disney's identity. Animation is who they are. That's what they're known for. That is the Disney brand. And Disney would not be as successful as they are today if the Renaissance had not happened. And there were a lot of people that contributed to this very, very successful time for the company. So I don't think we should credit any one person. And regardless of their respective shortcomings, I don't think we should endlessly slander Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner, as fun as that might be. But the point is, the Disney Renaissance is so much more than 10 movies in a span of 10 years. The Disney Renaissance saved animation. It created careers. It did so much. Because of his success with the animation studio, Katzenberg went on to start DreamWorks, which, yes, was a studio that was pretty much created out of malice towards Michael Eisner, especially when you think about how Katzenberg fast-tracked Ants to come out before Pixar's A Bug's Life, and Shrek, which was basically an attack on the entire Disney animated canon, and the fact that Lord Farquaad was intentionally modeled to look like Michael Eisner. At Katzenberg's request, yes, DreamWorks is not a studio that had the purest of intentions, but the Disney Renaissance did so much for so many people, not just Disney as a whole. The Disney Renaissance helped make Pixar what they were, because Pixar, at this time, in 1995, released Toy Story, which, as we know, was a joint venture with Disney. And one could even make the argument that it was around that time that Jeffrey Katzenberg kind of proved that he wasn't the genius that he thought he was, because Katzenberg pushed for a really, really edgy, irreverent style of humor, and he made Woody into a monster. And let me tell you something, Ham was not a saint either in the original version of Toy Story. Look that up, trust me. The original version of Toy Story is not even remotely close to what we got. So maybe Katzenberg was not as great as he thought he was. Maybe it was Michael Eisner. Maybe it was Frank Wells. Or maybe it was Roy Disney's passion to keep animation going, despite the fact that when Eisner arrived and his regime took over, they didn't believe in animation, because they didn't necessarily have a reason to believe in animation at that point in time. But Roy's passion for the medium of animation, to keep his uncle's legacy alive, maybe that's what did it. The Disney Renaissance is one of the most remembered times in Hollywood, because it marked a massive creative and financial resurgence for the Walt Disney Company. The word Renaissance means rebirth, and it often has an artistic connotation. So there could not have been a more perfect name for this era of Disney animation than the Disney Renaissance. And it would never have happened without the leadership of Michael Eisner, Frank Wells, and Jeffrey Katzenberg. Thank you for watching Disney Shills. If you would like to tell me how wrong I am about any of the history here, feel free to do so in the comments section below. If you have any thoughts, I'd love to hear them, because I love discussing the inner workings of Disney. And I made this video strictly out of passion for Disney, out of passion for the animated movies. And if you enjoyed this video, I would strongly recommend that you watch the documentary Waking Sleeping Beauty on Disney Plus, because it is about strictly the creative side of the Disney Renaissance, specifically involving Jeffrey Katzenberg, Roy Disney, and Peter Schneider. And if you were interested in the Disney Renaissance, not just from a creative standpoint, but from a business standpoint, I highly recommend you read my favorite book of all time, Disney War, by James B. Stewart. You can listen to it on Audible, you can buy it on Amazon for a pretty reasonable price. It is a fantastic book. Otherwise, thank you for watching. Like, share, and subscribe, and all that other obligatory stuff that I'm supposed to say at the end of this video. And may your heart be your guiding key.